Hi everyone, I'm Traci Stein, and welcome to the Unpacking Possibility Podcast. I'm really excited to be with you here today because we're going to talk about something that I think affects just about everyone, and it's dealing with criticism. So finding a good way and a healthy way and an effective way to deal with criticism. Now, it's important before we even get into the whole way, the whole idea of dealing with criticism, to talk about the different types of criticism. So there's constructive criticism, right? And you'll probably recognize that even if you feel a little bit wounded or surprised in the moment, because constructive criticism, is designed to be helpful. And usually it's delivered by someone that you know to be generally well-intentioned. It might even be something that, even if it stings a little in the beginning or in the moment, later on as you reflect, you might feel like, you know what, I didn't love hearing that, but it is probably good to know. And destructive criticism is something where, it really just has a different flavor, and you kind of know it when you hear it. And it's criticism that's designed to just be hurtful or demean you. And it serves a lot of purposes for the criticizer, different purposes. And we'll get into that more in a moment. But it's really important to notice your first impulse when you want to respond to criticism. And if you can, practice that mindfulness, that mindful awareness and breathing, and give yourself time before you respond. You don't have to respond right then, even though criticism that feels wounding can kind of make us feel like we have to. It's like we have this hot potato inside of us and we need to just lob it at the person who's doing the criticizing. So I think another way to clarify the difference between constructive and destructive criticism is to use some examples. So as an example, I remember this has got to be like 25 years ago, and I was working at a job in a really stimulating environment, and one of my colleagues, a senior colleague, was telling me about a project she was working on and opining on something, and I don't even remember what the topic was, but I was really excited by what she was talking about, and I was probably afraid that I would forget what I was going to say. And without even realizing it, I kept interrupting her. And I also have a little bit of an attention deficit issue myself, and I'm not exaggerating. That's actually true, and it runs in my family. So it was harder to kind of keep those thoughts inside. And the colleague basically stopped me and said, "Traci, stop interrupting me." And in that moment, I wasn't even really aware that I was interrupting her so much, and I felt embarrassed and a bit wounded. But as I thought about it, I realized, wow, I really do have to practice more kind of mindful awareness and just breathe through. And you know what? We all have a bunch of thoughts that come up when we're listening to someone else talk. Sometimes somebody's taking a long time to tell us their story or point of view, and maybe we even get bored, or we just want to engage more immediately. But the feedback was really important. And I think I've made a point ever since that moment, decades ago, to try and be more aware of my own kind of tendency to interrupt. So that's an example of constructive criticism. Even though I think the person might have been irritated, and you can feel that, and even though it felt kind of embarrassing in the moment, it was important, and I don't think it was intended to wound me. Now, destructive criticism, I really think it has a different energy. And whether you believe in energy or not, you can almost feel the emotion or the intention of the person. There are certain people who routinely deliver what I would call destructive criticism. And destructive criticism, examples would be people who, these are some, I'm sure everybody will recognize these examples, and you might have even been guilty of engaging in destructive criticism. So, commenting on other people's weight in a really derisive way. So like, oh, that person's so fat, or why are they wearing that outfit? They shouldn't be wearing that. Well, that's a type of destructive criticism. And sometimes people try and couch that type of criticism in language that's made to make it look like it's constructive, like, well, I'm just trying to help you. I'm just trying to prevent you from embarrassing yourself or wearing something that's not flattering. But it's really the kind of criticism that it's not anyone's business to make that comment. It's generally unhelpful. And it can come from somebody's own fears about that very same thing within themselves. Another example is I had a colleague years ago that loved to talk about how stupid other people were. And as I relay that now, I'm thinking, how could anybody not see that as just self-serving and destructive, right? Because even if you think other people are less intelligent, it's completely unhelpful to make that comment. And it just has a nasty feel whenever it comes out. Now you can hear my dog, Loretta, who is a Chihuahua mix, getting very engaged in this conversation. I think she doesn't like destructive criticism either. Right, Loretta? Okay, I just had to take a quick break and let Loretta out, but I'm back. But anyway, destructive criticism, you know it when you see it. And oftentimes people who do it habitually get really good at it, and they get really good at not taking ownership of it if you call them on it. And, everybody can be irritable or feel judgmental and deliver criticism that really, even if we think it might be constructive at the time, it really isn't terribly helpful. So I don't want to make it into this thing that it's so pathological that only a certain number of people do it. Just about everybody has given feedback that is more for them than for the recipient of the feedback, right? It's just part of being human. But again, some people do it all the time. And I find that the people who do it in public or target comments to strangers or target comments in a way that the recipient really can't understand without looking like they're overreacting, those are the people who do it because it really feeds something unhealthy within them. So why do people consistently deliver destructive criticism, right? Well, one reason is that, we talked about toxic personality types in a previous podcast. So the narcissists of the world and the Machiavellians of the world and the sadists and the sociopaths. And oftentimes people will have traits of more than one kind of personality, even if they don't necessarily meet criteria for a clinical diagnosis. We're not even worried about that. But if you think about it, people who tend to be more narcissistic, who really have to build themselves up and tear other people down, well, they don't, at their core, they don't feel like they're enough unless they are better than. So whether it's prettier or thinner or more successful or having more money or thinking they're smarter or whatever it is, for those personalities, pretty often they perceive other people's basic goodness or competence or whatever as a threat. And so they need to bring other people down to build themselves up. That's one reason people engage in a lot of destructive criticism. And you're probably all thinking of someone, at least one person you know, who does that. And again, it might be you. I don't know. Because we all have our ways of coping that are more helpful and less helpful. And, destructive criticism is a less helpful one overall. The other thing is when somebody maybe even unconsciously fears something that they have a quality in themselves or that they're not enough. What they will do is use the psychological defensive projection. And many of you probably heard that term. But what it really means is that for the person who's constantly commenting negatively on other people's weight, chances are either they've been overweight themselves or they have a tremendous fear of being overweight. And overweight to them would mean unacceptable or unlovable or all of these other things they've attached to that idea. And so what they do is, instead of taking a look at that concern in themselves, they project it onto other people, and they see it in everybody else, and they have to make comments, and they have to devalue other people, because on some level it feels like it's protecting them from their own worries about, again, being not enough. And again, whether it's overweight or not smart enough or not successful enough and so forth. There are also people who are just generally kind of sadistic, right? And as we talked about in the previous podcast on toxic personalities, people who have sadistic traits like causing other people distress. It gives them kind of a little bit of a high. So it's that kind of hit of excitement or satisfaction. It just feels good. And thankfully, that's a smaller percentage of the population. But again, you don't have to be someone who's causing physical pain to say things that are sadistic. They're just intended to cause distress or suffering or embarrassment to someone else because you enjoy it. And it's really unfortunate. And some people just like creating chaos too. That's the Machiavellian that we talked about, the people who like scheming and just trying to kind of create problems, social discomfort. And the people who are really skilled at that, they do it because they can. And it puts you in the very awkward position of either looking like you're just taking this kind of destructive and devaluing comments and like you can't do anything about it, which feels awful. Or you say something, usually you might overreact and get angry or get frustrated or tell them where to go. And then actually, they have the satisfaction of seeing you look like the person who is being out of control or being destructive and so forth. So don't give them that satisfaction. We'll get to that in a moment. And really, again, everyone can think of somebody like that. And it could be over something so stupid like, the person who is super clean in their house and has to talk about how dirty other people's houses are. You can really be destructively critical about just about anything. You can be destructively critical about other people's kids and how they're not doing well compared to your kids. And you can be on the receiving end of that kind of thing as well. So what do you do if somebody is clearly being destructively critical? And especially if it's somebody you have to spend time with to some extent, like a coworker or a neighbor or a family member or an in-law, right? Because that's a lot harder. I mean, if it was just a stranger on the street, you would just clearly not engage with them. You're never going to have a relationship with them. But if it's the coworker who has to make comments or somebody in your friend circle, but they feel more like a frenemy than friend, or perhaps it's a family member or an in-law. I'm going to give you a few options of ways you can react and try them out and see what works best for you. Now, one option is to wait till you are calm. There's a saying, strike when the iron is hot. Everybody's familiar with that. Well, the psychological version is strike when the iron is cold. So in other words, wait till you calm down before you respond to somebody who's saying something offensive. You don't have to respond right in that moment. And if you've never brought it up to them before, you might want to come from a place, again, of calm and pull them aside later and say, I don't know if you're aware, but when you make these comments, they actually don't feel helpful. It feels very hurtful. And I'm going to ask you to keep those thoughts to yourself, right? Because we can't control anybody else's thoughts. So don't try and change their opinion because you probably won't. Some people who maybe are a little more emotionally healthy or self-reflective might say, you know what, why am I doing that? Or even if I really think this, it's not helpful and it's hurtful to the relationship, and they'll stop doing it. Or they'll catch themselves more often. So that would be the best possible outcome. But if the person is someone who just enjoys lobbing these, hot coals at you, what you say actually isn't going to do much good. I have to be honest. And again, it's worth trying, but I wouldn't try again and again and again to change somebody who probably doesn't want to change. It's a tool that they've been using for a long time. And it's really up to each individual to decide if they want to change the tools they're using. And some people don't. So another option is to notice, but observe it like it's a stormy cloud in the sky and just breathe through it. Barely react. Because somebody's allowed to have their opinion, but if you don't engage, at first they will amp it up like a kid having a tantrum. And in fact, the harmful part of somebody who wants to cause you distress is a very psychologically young and primitive part of them, right? So, if a toddler were having a tantrum and you responded every single time or even part of the time, they would know that it gets them the result that they want, right? You'd either give them candy or let them stay up late or whatever. But if you stopped kind of responding and held your ground, what would happen with the toddler would be the toddler would amp it up at first and the tantrum would get worse and they'd do it more. But eventually they would learn that that's not the way to get your attention. And so you would effectively extinguish that behavior. That's the psychological term. But you would, just like putting out a fire, you would extinguish that behavior. And so not responding in a way that makes you look bad or indicates that you're super distressed, that's a good way to go. So somebody's saying, that outfit looks terrible on you, or you really shouldn't wear that, and I'm just trying to be helpful to you. You could be like, oh, mm-hmm. Or you could say, thanks for sharing that, or you're entitled to your opinion, or anything in that realm. Or you could just choose to pretend as if you didn't hear it. That's another option. And another option is to limit your engagement with a person. And so if it's somebody you work with, that's going to be more challenging, but you could perhaps schedule or your day so that you interact less with someone. There, it's kind of worth just saying something. I mean, if it's super destructive, then you have to make a human resources complaint, right? If it's really overt and awful and abusive, then you absolutely should. But if it's just kind of like stupid comments that are unhelpful under the guise of being helpful, I would just limit my interaction with somebody to the best of my ability. Now, that becomes more difficult if it's somebody who is a relative or an in-law, because there are probably at least a few times a year where you might see them. But it's not impossible to change the amount of engagement you have with someone. Because chances are what you're going to do is if you engage with them less, they're going to have to make a lot of effort to seek you out more to deliver these, what they think are these gems, these fabulous criticisms. And at the end of the day, if you don't really respond, they're probably not going to keep repeating things because that makes them look ridiculous. So, and my final thing is, and again, I've said it before, but have a meditative practice that helps you to not be as distressed, to observe things, again, like a cloud in the sky, breathe through them, and then return your awareness to something else. Because at the end of the day, you actually are the one who's in control of how you react and what you choose to do. And again, remember, the toddler and that person, if they're not getting the candy that they're looking for by getting a big reaction out of you, they're going to stop tantruming. It's just the way it is. So I hope this was helpful. And remember, it's so important to take good care of you. So do something really nice for yourself today and every day. And I wish you all the very best now and always. Until next time, be well. And of course, if you like the podcast, please click like and share and subscribe and leave me a comment. I'd love to hear how you're doing.